D OBrien, bonjour, nous sommes heureux de vous recevoir dans les locaux de l'Homme Nouveau pour donc cette émission à la page. Vous êtes connu en France pour les différents livres qui ont été traduits, je pense au Père Elijah, je pense également à la librairie Sophia, ou encore votre dernier livre dont on va parler aujourd'hui, le Journal de la peste aux éditions Salvator. Vous étiez d'abord peintre, comment vous êtes-vous retrouvé écrivain et auteur à succès?
Merci beaucoup. C'est un grand plaisir d'être à Paris, dans la France. Moi-même, je suis écrivain et peintre. I have been a writer for 50 years, at least. Although I remember when I was 12 years old, I wrote my first novel. It was about 10 pages long. And I thought it was a brilliant work of literature. I was the only person who thought so, but it was a seed of the future. I did not know it at the time when I was a boy. For most of my life, as a man, I've been a painter of religious art, Christian art. But about 40 years ago, as I was painting, a very powerful story arose in my imagination, and it kept persisting, and it wouldn't go away. At first I thought it was a distraction. I kept pushing it away month after month, and finally I thought, I will write this down, and then it will be out of my mind and finished, and I can get back to focusing on my visual art. So that was the first novel I ever wrote. It was called A Cry of Stone. Between the writing of my first novel and the publication of my first book was almost 20 years. 20 years of rejection letters from publishers. The constant theme in the rejection of my manuscripts was, this is a very interesting story. This is a very interesting writing. It's good writing. However, you must understand that the reading public is no longer interested in your worldview, meaning faithful Catholicism.
Yes.
So often they would say, if you would rewrite the book, either deleting the Catholicism or warping it to what they called a more realistic view of Catholicism, in other words, corrupt Catholicism, they said, we would be very happy to publish your book. And of course, I realized this would be betrayal. Betrayal not only of the truth, but betrayal of art, the rights of art. So I remained unpublished for 2 decades until, through an act of providence, an American Catholic publisher, Ignatius Press, asked me if I had any books, any manuscripts, and then from that began a whole cavalcade, avalanche of published books. So there are now 12 novels in print in English. 10 of these have been translated into French.
Nous vous retrouvons donc pour parler un peu plus de votre dernier livre, le Journal de la peste, un livre qui raconte, qui narre la fuite d'un journaliste traqué par le système, traqué par l'État finalement. On y voit comme une trace de 1984 d'Orwell. Je me suis demandé pendant la lecture, est-ce que vous n'avez pas essayé de réactualiser 1984 pour notre temps?
Yes, in a sense, the journal of the plague is a dystopia. In some senses it is like Orwell, perhaps more like Huxley, Brave New World, or a combination of Orwell and Huxley, but set in our times, our political and social situations. So yes, it takes it farther. it raises many questions about the nature of Western society. Are we living in the midst of a new kind of totalitarianism with imposed social revolution? A social revolution that strikes at the core, at the heart of the very identity of the human person. What is man? What is his value? Does he have any value beyond what the state or society says he has? Are some human beings less human than others? Orwellian concept. Are some human beings less equal than others? A la Animal Farm. Therefore, are some human beings disposable? Children in the womb, are elderly, are infirm, are depressed, anyone who wishes to, who has lost hope for their own life, the state will kill you. But we will kill you hygienically with a nice clean needle. And we will speak in soft voices. So the question a number of my books raise, not all my novels, but the dystopians, is, are we in the most dangerous form of totalitarianism in our times? Because it does not really reveal itself for what it truly is.
Yes, it's sweet, totalitarianism.
Soft. Soft, but deadly.
Votre livre parle beaucoup d'éducation, la façon dont le journaliste, donc, qui est le principal personnage, éduque ses enfants, la façon dont l'État, par le biais de l'école, essaie d'éduquer les enfants aussi. Est-ce que les parents doivent se méfier de l'école et de la façon dont l'école s'occupe de leurs enfants?
Yes, I think parents are called to be vigilant of any form of education. To be aware that the teachings of the Church on education is that we, the parents, are the first teachers, the primary teachers of our family. Therefore, education systems, public, Catholic even, must be accountable to the rights of the family, the rights of parents, and the exigencies of Catholic teaching, the whole truth of our faith, the whole truth about man. We are living in a system now in most of the Western world that says something very different. The state, in a sense, it's perhaps more an ethos than a law. The state owns your children, and you are permitted to lend your children back to the system for the day. So it seems to me we have created a society in which parents must justify their parenting to the state, rather than the other way around, where the state should be the servant of the family. A sane country knows that its life, its future depends upon the health of the family. And the family, in order to be the family, must live fully the teachings of Christ, if it wishes to have life for the future.
C'est la fuite de votre personnage, c'est pendant sa fuite qu'il arrive à se convertir. Et est-ce que donc est-ce que c'est notre société contemporaine qui est un obstacle à l'évangélisation?
I believe it is, to the degree that it does not respect the rights of the family and the rights of the individual. But there is a distinction which must be made here. In a healthy society, in a healthy way of Christian life, we must be concerned equally not only with freedom is crucial, but also with responsibility. We have responsibilities which must be exercised in integration with freedom, as individuals, as families, as societies, as nations. So my concern in some of my writings is that a new form of totalitarianism may speak continually about freedom, as it slowly, persistently removes responsibility from the individual, the family, it gives many rewards, but it also has a terrible cost in the long run. One of the ominous signs in modern societies in the West, modern nations, is the indoctrination of the young, the imposition of social engineering, we can call it, and also invading the rights of families to decide what their children's religious and moral formation will be. This is a violation of freedom. This is a violation of responsibility. It's a very dangerous move. We think of ourselves as a humanist civilization, the democratic West. But as I said before, it's in such a milieu that the most dangerous form of totalitarianism can emerge. But it does it gradually. There are no concentration camps. There are no piles of burning books in the street. There are no extermination squads in the streets. But the taking of innocent life occurs now in hygienic hospitals and clinics. The burning of books is done with exquisite manners by simply removing truth from libraries, from the education system, and replacing it with a new narrative, a new ideology. And this is what we must recognize, that we are in the midst, we are immersed in a relentless social revolution that would take our children's minds, hearts and souls, would take all of us and reshape us according to a tragically stunted concept of man, l'homme, la condition humaine.
Ce qui me fait d'ailleurs tout à fait penser à ce dont vous nous parliez en début d'émission, quand vous parliez du refus de vos premiers manuscrits, parce qu'ils parlaient du Christ et qu'ils annonçaient le Christ. On vous avait d'ailleurs demandé de retirer tout ce qui touchait à la culture chrétienne pour pouvoir vous publier. Donc c'est amusant de retrouver exactement ce que vous dénoncez actuellement. C'est d'autant plus vrai que vous l'avez vécu vous-même.
It is certainly symptomatic of a larger cultural war. I think in terms of the new evangelization, the question you raised, we must recognize that culture is one of the primary fronts in the struggle for the redefinition of man, for the definition of the value of man. We have been losing most of our battles in the last century, I would say, primarily through culture. The power of the new electronic culture, the new media, literature, film, especially television, all the avenues in which man expresses his concept of himself, his values, reflecting back to ourselves who we are. At the same time, culture also influences how we think about reality, about life, about love, about whether there is only a material existence for man, or whether there is a metaphysical reality, whether there is an eternity. All these questions are gradually being slowly removed, like removing oxygen from the atmosphere. You don't realize at first what's happening. It becomes harder and harder to breathe. No, that's a long preamble. A healthy society, let us say a truly pluralistic society, a truly multicultural society, would have plenty of room for the Christian voice in the arts to enter the mainstream of culture. It would be one of many voices, yes, but we would be present, we would be there. We would be a light in the agora. Why then have we been, almost every writer, Catholic writer, an artist, why are we walled into a ghetto? Why has this happened? There are many reasons, I think. But one dimension of that is the spiritual war. The adversary of mankind, the enemy of mankind, desires to remove any reference, any témoignage, any witness to the reality of Jesus Christ as a living presence, and in terms of salvation history, that he will return, and he may even be near. I believe he is near, he is coming. So in the strategies of the war, the strategy of hell, the Christian voice must be silenced. It must be rendered of no importance to man. It must be presented in culture as a dying mythology, an artifact. Our churches are beautiful, magnificent artifacts of an era beyond which we have evolved. The brave new man in his brave new world no longer needs Christ. This is the concept. The reality is that Jesus Christ is alive.
Yes.
He is totally alive. He is who he says he is. The Gospels are reality. That is reality. And he is coming. And perhaps we will see him face to face. But in the interim, there is a struggle, a terrible struggle with the forces of darkness. So in my novels and also my non-fiction, I ask the question. I ask the questions of basically the questions of the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, and also the Book of Revelation. Are we awake? Are we Catholic people awake? And if the times which the prophets and our Lord Jesus himself foretold would come, if those times are our times, we do not know for sure, but if they are our times, are we prepared? Are our hearts, our souls prepared? This is a question, these questions must be asked by every generation. Every generation of those who seek to follow the Lord Jesus. He warns us in the Gospels that precisely that generation which does not recognize the signs of the times, that generation which is not awake, that is when the maximum crisis will occur. And he says, remember Lot's wife.
Oui, c'est donc de notre responsabilité si plus grand monde ne parle du Christ.
Yes. Yeah. It is our responsibility. Each in our way, each in our own vocation, our place in the world. We can bear witness to him at the very least with our lives. You know, it's not always a matter of speaking, although there will be moments when we must speak the truth, or writing. But it must be a witness of our lives. We are a word. We are a living word if we are in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
So we must be a presence in the world of love and truth, but not in the modern sense of compartmentalizing love and truth, but caritas and veritas integrated as to a single unified force for transformation. Love and truth as one thing. You know, so that I believe is the direction we must go. Not in the direction of fear, but a kind of deep realism. A deep realism founded on hope, on confidence in the Lord.
C'est un livre donc très sombre. Y a-t-il une place dans cette histoire pour l'espoir et même plus que l'espoir pour l'espérance?
It's a dark book.
Yes, yes.
Yes. If you read the last chapter, you see
Yes.
that the central character, Nathaniel, who is very much a modern man, wrestling with despair on one side and rage on the other. But you see, he is an independent man. He's a brave man. He's a hero in a way. But he is a hero on his own terms, with his own strength. So the story of the crisis of his life and that of his children is a passage from the autonomous hero to a true heroism in Christ. You know, what we must remember is that courage is a virtue of the natural man. It's part of our nature when we are being good at being human. But courage is not enough in the face of radical evil. Courage and hope and grace to give us hope. So in dark times, when everything is put to the test, that is the time when we may be given an opportunity to grow in hope by asking our Father in heaven for this particular grace of hope. L'espérance en français?
Yes.
Espérance. But it is a supernatural gift. It's not a natural gift. Hope is not optimism. Hope is certainly not pessimism, but it's not optimism either. This is, don't worry, be happy. It's okay. Nothing bad will happen. Or if we have problems in the modern age, we've always had problems. Yes, but in my books I ask questions such as, what is the nature of the problems of our times? Is there something distinctive about them? Is there a distinctive apocalyptic dimension to what mankind is facing now? I am asking questions. I don't have all the answers. But I think in a healthy society, a healthy culture, these questions would be alive and vibrant. They would be asked, they would be discussed. I don't feel they're being discussed. I don't hear them being discussed in the mainstream of culture. I see a tsunami of falsehood in the mainstream of culture. So here is a possible mission for Christian art, all the arts, if we are to create works of truth and beauty. They may not necessarily be overtly evangelical, but if they are true and beautiful, if they tell the true story of man, they are bringing oxygen back into the modern age. They are bringing pure water back into the modern age. At the very least, they are asking essential questions. So this does not mean we have to be didactic, but it does mean we have to be authentic. And I believe, through my long experience as an artist, that this is possible only if we are praying. And praying constantly, and being nourished by the sacraments. For me, that is my life. That is the source of my life.
Vous êtes bien connu en France pour votre livre Le Père Elijah, qui a été écrit en 1996, traduit plus tard en français. Est-ce que aujourd'hui, si vous deviez réécrire ce livre, vous le réécririez de la même façon?
No, but to answer why would be very painful.
Yes.
In terms of, okay, well, I'll try and answer it. I would rewrite it a little differently. The essential meaning of the work is true and is clear, and it continues to have significance. The condition in the world and in the church is more complex now. We are facing grave problems. within the body of Christ. Very severe problems. I do not want to comment on those because that's not my job. I pray about them. I sacrifice for them. But if I could say anything, I would say that the call of every single believing Catholic now is to pray for the purification and the strengthening of the body of Christ, of the Church in our times. Perhaps more than we have ever done so since the first centuries. We must pray for the bride, because she is the bride of Christ, being prepared for the bridegroom. As always, she bleeds from many wounds. She has many betrayers and scandals. But she is the bride, and we have to love her with a great love, a very deep love, and love the charism of Peter, of the papacy, and pray that it fulfills its mission in the world. Pray for the purification. That the Church may be a light to the Gentiles in our times. That is our task, to pray and sacrifice now for the bride.
Merci beaucoup, Michael O'Brien, d'être donc passé dans les locaux de l'Homme Nouveau pour cette émission à la page, qui nous a permis, bien sûr, d'en apprendre un peu plus sur votre dernier livre traduit en France, Le Journal de la Peste, mais aussi d'en apprendre un peu plus sur vous, sur votre personnalité et sur votre parcours. Merci encore. Clémence Cavaline, bonjour. Vous êtes le biographe, en tout cas vous avez écrit une biographie de Michael O'Brien, vous l'avez suivi. Qu'est-ce qui vous a poussé à vous intéresser à cet auteur?
How did it come about? It began with Michael's novel Father Elijah, which I read and wrote an article about. And then the idea slowly developed, why shouldn't I visit Michael and ask him questions about his work? And one of my friends had bought some paintings from Michael and therefore had his email, so we got into contact with email, and after a year I came to Canada, prepared with questions, and we had one very special weekend in Michael's house. His wife Sheila was away. It was I think October, November, stillness, and we had a whole weekend where the fire was burning and I was posing questions, Michael was answering, and you say a conversation on Catholicism, art, spirituality, children. It was a fascinating conversation, and that conversation continued on distance, but then I came back for doing another round of questions. I was writing more about his work, and then the idea about doing a biography came up. It's kind of evolved through this because Michael O'Brien's Canadian publisher wanted him to write a self-autobiography, but Michael didn't want that. So the task went to me, and that was a really great thing, I would say. So for a couple of years, went back and forth to Canada doing interviews, but I also got access to Michael's, also his non-published, unpublished works, including his diary, which was crucial for the biography. Getting, you say, under the skin of the author, into his mind and thinking, and also all Michael's very deep and intense religious life, his religious experiences. Because you have to understand, if you read Michael's novels, you'll sense that he has a rich interior religious life, but through the diary, I could see, and I hope I can show it also in the biography, that Michael is actually a mystic.
Oh dear.
Yes. Yes, and I think one of the great points with that it's the same with this art. Anyone can, in a sense, be a Michael O'Brien. Anyone could do this, take this choice and give his life fully to Christ and try to do art and suffer all the pains and do the sacrifices. Not many are willing, unsurprisingly. But I also think that to have a rich interior mystical life is something that is possible for all Christians. You just, as Michael just explained, you just need to live a serious Christian life with the help of the sacraments. And if you pray every day and make prayer a part of your ordinary work. The prayer is not something special, you do it special occasion. Of course, sometimes you need just to focus on prayer. But when prayer becomes the way you live, so to speak, then the interior mystical life develops. So it was great. It was great for me to see that, and also as I'm also a painter, to see someone 20 years older than me who did some choices that I didn't do, more radical choices. It was very inspiring, and so it was. I think the biography is a fruit of listening to Michael, but also a process of conversation, which I hope comes through. But even more in the book that was just published in Canada, where I used our interviews to show this back and forth and how this conversation grows. And the primary goal with that book is to address young Christian artists that would like to do something similar to what Michael did, to inspire them. It's not impossible. You can do that choice, even if for example, if you go to an art school, everyone will be going in that direction. You could go in that direction, and it will be fulfilling. It will be a sacrificial life, but that's the only fulfilling life. That's the only real life. So for me, for Michael doing these incredible strong choices, living through all the hardships, for me, I just harvest the fruits of that, and then I try to helping, distributing those fruits, and hopefully, when we're speaking about the church and the trouble and the crisis of church, I tend to think of the future church. What we are doing is preparing for the future church that will come. Therefore, young Christians are important, young Christian artists who do culture. But the choices that Michael did in the 1970s and 80s and 90s are a resource for these young people.
Ce sera donc sur cette note d'espoir que nous clôturerons notre émission à la page avec Michael O'Brien et Clémence Caveline. Merci beaucoup.